All right, welcome back. Last time we read up on what is evolution, how's natural selection work with that, and we read up on fossil evidence talking about the Archaeopteryx, a bird-like dinosaur that suggests heavily that dinosaurs evolved into birds. All right. If you missed that, please go back and watch that video or read that reading. Today we are going to talk about anatomical evidence of evolution, and we're going to talk about some genetic evolution of and molecular evidence of evolution. And then you are going to have these questions at the end on a Google form. All right, so don't try to answer it here or email me the PDF of this. All right, go to the Google form and answer these questions. And if you are sick of hearing my voice, this PDF is on a Google Classroom. Go ahead and read it yourself. Otherwise, let's read along. Evidence from anatomy and development. At one time, scientists inferred evolutionary relationships between species primarily by comparing their anatomies or the structures of their bodies. Species that share a common ancestor typically have similar structures. All right, example would be humans and chimps. We both have feet. We both have opposable thumbs on our hands. A lot of animals don't have feet and hands like we do. They like paws. Our skeletal structures are extremely similar. The list goes on. All right, so scientists have always thought that we had some kind of relationship. Going back to the reading. Even before discovery of the Archaeopteryx, many scientists had suspected that birds evolved from reptiles such as dinosaurs. A side note, dinosaurs are not reptiles. They are their own thing. The tissue that produce feathers in birds are similar to those that produce scales in reptiles. Birds also have scales on their feet, and they lay eggs that are similar in basic structure to reptile eggs. So those are anatomical similarities, physical traits that they have in common. Scales and feathers are homologous structures. That is, their similarities are due to evolution from a common ancestor. We talked about that in the previous set of notes, guys. Homologous structures, they come from divergent evolution, shared ancestor. Back to the reading. Many species that do not share a close evolutionary relationship nevertheless have similar structures. At first glance, fish fins and dolphins' fins may seem more similar than scales and feathers, yet dolphins and fish do not share a recent common ancestor. Their fins are analogous structures. They function similarly because they are adaptations to similar conditions, life underwater. Again, back to that last set of notes, analogous structures comes from convergent evolution, meaning two different species ended up sharing the same environment with the same needs to survive, so they end up getting similar structures. So remember these two words, homologous. Homo means same, and the structures are the same. Analogous sounds like analogy. You can compare them. So they're not the same, but they're close enough that you can compare them. So shared ancestor, not shared ancestor. Back to the reading. Scientists can differentiate between homologous and analogous structures by examining them in detail. Unlike analogous structures, which tend to look similar only on the surface level, homologous structures are similar at multiple levels. Though they serve different functions, dolphin fins are structurally similar to human arms. The structures have similar bones, the humerus and the radius. So look down here at the picture, the human radius and the human ulna, and the dolphin's radius and the dolphin's ulna. And two bones right here, we have two bones right here, arranged in similar ways. That's a ball and socket joint. Also, they have a ball and socket joint at the shoulder. This is because both humans and dolphins share a relatively recent common ancestor, a mammal which the same kind of joint and arrangement of bones inherited by both species. So over here someplace was an ancient ancestor, and its group split into two different paths. One path ended up becoming humans, another path ended up becoming dolphins. But we kept the same bone structures. Some homologous structures are vestigial, meaning that they have little function or have lost their original function. That was a vocab word, guys, vestigial. It was also in the last set of notes. And we no longer use this structure. We have it, we just don't use it. An example of a vestigial structure is the pelvic bones of snakes, which do not attach to the spine and simply float with the snake's body. I used the pelvic bone of the whale. It's the same setup. I think there's a picture down here. Find it. There we go. Right here. This big whale, this little pelvic bone, not attached to the vertebrae, not attached, doesn't have any limbs or anything. It's just floating there. Right? The same thing with snakes. Normally, pelvic bones function to attach lower limbs to the spine. The presence of these vestigial structures indicates that snakes evolved from an ancestor with a functional pelvis and limbs. Furthermore, snakes shared a common ancestor with four-limbed vertebrates, such as amphibians and mammals. These evolutionary relationships are shown in the diagram on the next page. All right, so this is an evolutionary tree, again. All right, so shared ancestor all the way at the beginning, and then some branched off and became fish. Some branched off this way and developed limbs and become, an amphibious creature. Some branched off and became outright amphibians. Some branched off and became reptiles, like snakes. Right? These reptiles, again, branched. These reptiles, by the way, were not snakes yet. They are four-legged. So 4 limbs down here. Everything up here has 4 limbs. These 4-limbed reptiles, some branched off, lost their limbs and became snakes. And the other group of 4-limbed animals branched off and got hair, started giving live births, started standing up on their 2 limbs. Oh, not all of them. Became mammals. Right? And then from here, we had another branch from the ones who stood up on 2 limbs and became apes, humans. So this green dot represents the common ancestor of all present-day amphibians, snakes, and mammals. Right? We are all related to whatever this creature was. Right? Scientists also examine how traits develop in embryos and fetuses. In developing organisms, such as some characteristics may appear only during early stages. For example, the fetuses of fish, amphibians, snakes, and mammals all develop similar throat structures at a certain stage. These point to evolution from a common ancestor that developed and retained the same characteristics. Let me find you that picture. All right, so I struggled to find a real picture of the fetus with the throat slits on it, but here we see the fish versus mammals, looking very similar, right? Really hard to tell the difference. But you can see that on the fish, they have these slits here that will eventually become the gills. Where on the mammals, they also have the slits here that they're there because the DNA from that shared ancestor probably also had gills. But then as this fetus develops, that gene turns off and the gills start to disappear and just get replaced by skin. These point to evolution from a common ancestor that developed and retained the same characteristic. In fish, these structures support the gills, but in other animals, they disappear as development continues. So which of the following structures are not homologous? The wings of a fly and the wings of a pigeon. You can compare them, they're both wings, but did they come from the same ancestor? That's the question. The gills of a goldfish and the gills of a shark. Same question. Did they come from the same ancestor? Are they similar enough? The arms of a human and the arms of a chimpanzee, same question. The roots of a white oak tree and the roots of a red oak tree. And so I read the question, which of the following structures are not homologous? No? I'm going to go with A, the wings of a fly and the wings of a pigeon. I don't think they were similar enough to come from the same species. Homologous structures are found in organisms that share a relatively recent common ancestor. Goldfish and sharks both evolved from the common fish ancestor. Humans and chimps from a common primate ancestor. Yes, we count as primates. White oaks and red oaks from a common oak ancestor. Therefore, choices B, C, and D are incorrect. Flies are insects and pigeons are birds. Thus, they share a much more distant common ancestor. Their wings, though similar in function, are analogous, not homologous. Right? So the correct choice is A. The fly and pigeon's common ancestor, you back far enough, they have a common ancestor. That common ancestor probably did not have wings. All right. They both developed their wings separately and in two completely different ways. Right? The fly's wing is not made the same way as a bird's wing. All right, those were anatomical evidence, meaning we look at the structure and we see what they look like. Let's dive even deeper than that now, looking at evidence from genes and molecules. Scientists also use proteins, genes, and DNA as evidence for evolutionary relationships. Similarities among living things indicate that life on Earth have a common origin. For example, the genetic code is nearly universal, suggesting that it evolved very early in the history of life and was inherited by a species of a common ancestor. The sequences of bases in DNA or amino acids in a protein can also help determine the evolutionary relationships. DNA is passed on through generations, but mutations sometimes occur. These lead to differences in otherwise similar DNA sequences. These differences occur at a certain rate and indicate how long two lineages have evolved independently. All right, break down what that means. There is actually an average amount of time in which mutations tend to happen in a species. So we can backtrack those mutations throughout history and determine a clock, a timeline. How old are these different species? And how more closely related are they? Right over here. The greater number of species, the more time has passed since two species diverged from a common ancestor. More similar sequences indicate a more recent common ancestor. Right? Just like anatomical evidence, we look at a lion, we look at a tiger, and we tell that they look similar, so we think they're related. It's the same thing with DNA. We look at a lion's DNA, we look at a tiger's DNA, and we see a lot of things that are similar. So we think they are more closely related. This information can be used to construct trees representing evolutionary relationship. Each line or branch represents a lineage, a line of ancestors and descendants. Two branches separate where a speciation event gave rise to two different species. All right, so there's the trees again. We don't base the trees on anatomical evidence. We base the trees off of genetic evidence, DNA evidence. So we see a branch happening and then the branch splits. We call that speciation, where a brand new species occurs. Right? Differences may have been occurring throughout this whole thing, but those differences are still similar enough that they're the same species. It's the exact moment that they become so different that they're their own species that we make new branches. All right, so this one original group becomes two different groups. Same thing down here. This one original group, many changes, small changes happening, but the very moment that there's too many differences that they're not the same species anymore, then they branch into two different species, two different lineages. All right. Scientists can reconstruct evolutionary history by determining the number of differences in a DNA sequence for pairs of species. Pairs with the fewest differences share a common ancestor most recently, meaning the more you have in common, the closer your shared relative is to you. Pairs with the most differences have been evolving independently for a long period of time, meaning we all come from fish, right? Remember this picture that we have a shared fish ancestor. Humans and chimps both share that ancestor too, but humans and chimps have an even closer shared ancestor, some primate shared ancestor we both share. Humans and dogs have a much further relationship than that primate. You go past that primate back in time, eventually you'll come across a shared mammal ancestor that we have with dogs. And then you go even further. So humans and dogs are even more different physically and genetically than humans and chimps. Then you go back even further in time, and that shared mammal ancestor can eventually find a shared ancestor with fish, the modern day fish. So the more different we are, the further back in time our ancestors were common. Right? The table shows the number of amino acid differences in the cytochrome C protein for pairs of animal species. Okay, I'm not expecting you to know what a cytochrome C protein is. All right, this is a keystone trick, by the way. When you take the keystones, right, be aware of this kind of trick. This is not the important part. This is the important part. Differences. The table shows the number of differences in animal species. That's all the important part is. Use this information to determine the evolutionary relationships among these species. Write the name of each species in the correct blank box in the diagram below. So, a horse and a chicken have 11 things that are different. A horse and a horse, 0 things different. All right, it's a horse and a horse, so they're the same thing. A horse and a moth, we don't actually. It's 2 different. We don't even know. And horse and snake is 2 different. We don't have information on. All right. So a horse and a chicken have 11 things that are different. A moth and a chicken, 29 things different. A snake and a chicken, 21 things different. And a whale and a chicken, only 9 things different. So let's see. We want to try to figure out. Oh, there's even smaller number 5. Whale and horse. A lot more things because they're both mammals. All right. So what do we do? We are going to try to find the smallest number and put it in these 2 boxes where the most common ancestor is. All right. So what 2 animals have the smallest number of differences? And it looks like 5 is the smallest number. So horse and a whale would go in here. So horse and a whale. All right. The horse and a whale have the smallest amount of differences, so their ancestor is the closest. Then we take these guys' shared ancestor, and they have something with this guy. So next smallest number is 9. So the whale and the chicken look to have the next smallest number. So I'm going to put chicken right here. By the way, I did not previously do this. I do not know if my answers are correct. You are watching me figure this out on the spot. And then we got 18 between the snake and the horse and the snake and the whale, which are same ancestor. So I'm going to put the snake here. And then the snake and whatever these guys' shared ancestor is, put the moth all the way at the bottom. Let's see if I got mine right. Right, it looks like, so I'm setting it up now. The moth, something split, some shared ancestor split, and one became insects, bugs, and the other became four-legged animals. And yes, I know snakes do not have legs, but their ancestors did. So reptiles and things. And then those reptiles split, became eventually snakes, and then eventually, the four-legged animals that are walking around on Earth that got bigger. So dinosaurs were in here someplace, but eventually split into birds, so chicken, and the other one split into mammals. And then this shared mammal split, whale and a horse. So that looks right to me. Let's see if I am right. Horse and whale, then chicken, snake, moth. Horse and whale, chicken, snake, moth. Yes, got it right. Because the horse and the whale have the fewest number of amino acid differences, they share a common ancestor until most recently. These species are represented by top 2 branches in either order. It doesn't matter which one you put them in. The chicken amino acid sequence is more similar to that of the horse and whale than that of other species. So the chicken is represented by the middle branch, shared ancestor between the chicken and this shared ancestor of the horse and whale. The snake's the chicken is represented by the middle branch. The snake sequence is more similar to those of the horse, whale, and chicken than to that of the moth. And the snake is the fourth branch, which diverges from other species more recently than diverged from the moth at the bottom branch. All right, that is cool. All right, so now we got that set. These questions, like I said earlier, will be found as a Google form. All right, so get on that and good luck.